It's happening, guys. It's finally happening. This is a drill, but this is not a drill. Steam might be returning to the UK's rails, or at least a new chapter could emerge in the story of Steam. It's 2024 and a brand new experimental locomotive has been announced that is aiming to tackle the issue of diesel traction being phased out. Now, various attempts at this have been ongoing for some time using hydrogen, nuclear, batteries, and of course electricity fed to trains has been around for well over a century. But this is the first time we're hearing of an attempt to use a slightly more old-fashioned technology. Steam, it's steam, I've made that quite clear. This is an idea that I've been talking about for quite a few years now, so I am quite excited to see what happens. But it does come with a lot of questions that I'll bring up throughout the video. I don't have the answers, that is for you to tell me in the comments. You know everything! It isn't the first time that rail fans have dreamt of a 21st century steam locomotive. But perhaps it's not as simple as lighting a fire and boiling some water. So, we need to talk about previous failed attempts at a modern day steam engine, and discuss what this new prototype is doing differently. Ahead of the 200th anniversary of railways, we've already talked about how it all began. Now, let's discuss what could be the future of rail travel. Allow me to offend the team that I'm on. I think that steam trains deserve to cease. Taking Britain as an example, but it does apply to how many other countries felt at the time, by the 1960s steam technology was losing a battle against other options. Steam locomotives had been puffing along for well over 150 years. And these iron dinosaurs were still everyday transport in the same time that space shuttles were jetting off above. The internal combustion engine had transformed road travel, and was now creating an alternative on the tracks as well. Early diesel locomotives had a long way to evolve, often breaking down, being slower than or not as strong as their steam predecessors. British Railways did not help by rushing their dieselisation process, changing their minds at the last minute to abruptly ban steam for good. When they had taken control, the introduction of a standard set of locomotives was implemented to make the ultimate power force for every possible job. Robert Riddle's 2MT tanks, right up to the heavyweight 9Fs, were envisaged to go on right into the 1980s at least. It was probably a good thing they didn't, as coal was a heated topic in the UK by then. Nevertheless, steam power had very little changed since Rocket and the Rainhill trials. That sounds like a great band name. Before we eye up this new contender, we need to note attempts at redrawing the conventional steam loco that came before. Though they look drastically different, early engines like Lion and Golden Age locos like Mallard were built to do very similar jobs, and they did it in a very similar way. If you put a Lion up against a Mallard, my bets are on the Lion winning. But on the loco side of things, it's all down to subtle improvements to the same technique. A fuel is burnt to create fire. That fire travels through tubes within a huge enclosed space. On the other side of those tubes is water, which gets heated to create steam. That steam pushes on either side of a piston to turn the wheels via giant metal rods. Every country that had steam locomotives used this same idea. But some brave souls decided to spin things around. For instance, there's the LMS turbo motive. Using steam turbine technology, already in place on ships, instead of pushing cylinders, the steam spun a series of rotary blades to achieve motion. Whilst it did save on fuel consumption, ultimately this ingenuity was purely on the motion side of things, and the power source remained the same. Attempts were made elsewhere to have the steam turbine instead power an electric generator, feeding motors on the wheels. These proved inefficient and ridiculously heavy when carrying so much equipment. Similar trials were made with gas turbines instead, such as the British Railway GT3. These experiments proved that turbines were successful at consistent speeds, but the constant stopping and starting that railways require was a major drawback. Not only that, but the blades couldn't be reversed, so the gearing meant that their power was only available going forwards. The only loco designer that the outside world seems to know about, Sir Nigel Gresley, also tried his hand at breaking away from conventions. Equally inspired by the marine world, his hush-hush experiment swapped where the fire and water would usually be, putting the water in tubes that were encased by a goodness gracious great barrel of fire. This resulted in a higher pressure boiler that transmitted more power to the conventional cylinders, but maintenance costs and regular faults caused the hush-hush project to be silenced. One last example comes from a designer who was well known for going all in on risky new designs, and got extreme pros and cons as a result: Oliver Bulleid. Bearing the closest visual resemblance to this new engine, Bulleid's Leader was a last attempt to bring all of the advantages of diesel engines back into the steam era. Somewhere in this casing is a boiler, boxed in by two cabs, meaning it could be driven from either end. The two power bogies each had a set of 3 cylinders, were able to be swapped out easily during maintenance, and could handle tight corners far better than conventional steam engines. The Leader's downfalls mainly came from crew comfort, in that there wasn't any. It was like working in an oven, as the fireman had to shovel at angles to get to the encased firebox, and the driver didn't have it much better, being right in front of the smoke box. A corridor down one side meant that the boiler weighed the engine off balance, and the chain-driven axles had leaks from the oil bath that the chains dripped through. Apart from that, the engine could steam very well, and met the speeds and manoeuvrability required of it. But it did so at the cost of not being able to work where it was needed, because of how large and heavy it was. Taking his forward-thinking ideas to Ireland, Bulleid improved the design with his smaller CC1. But issues with operating the engine from either cab prevailed. Ultimately, in almost every case, these experiments perhaps had room to improve, but lack of funding and priority meant that they never were. The focus turned to the newer diesel electrics, and the development of steam was seemingly over. So what could a 21st century steam engine do differently? I'm no engineer, which is not an encouraging thing to hear before talking about engineering. But the common issue seems to be how the steam is made over how it is used. Traditional fire tube boilers require significant care to maintain constant pressure and to not overheat. A skilled job that is preserved by volunteers throughout the heritage sector, but not on a nationwide career scale. Having a fire creates smoke, ashes, clinker and soot, And whilst they can burn a range of fossil fuels, different designs are very fussy as to what their fuel source is, and there is no worldwide standard. Coals, woods, and even oils will all burn with unique characteristics depending on where in the world they come from, and fabricated alternatives such as e-coal are still some way off in mass development. This is a real crisis facing heritage railways in the UK at the moment, where coal sources are being cut off for the sake of appearing eco-friendly. So for future commercial use of steam, burning fossil fuels is a big red flag. A cleaner method of heating the water could come from electricity. After all, steam locos are affectionately known as kettles for good reason. Though it would require enormous amounts of electricity to do so, which could be used to directly power electric motors instead, it wouldn't be the first time that it was done. In the 1940s, Switzerland rebuilt some small tank engines with electric heating elements kept within the boilers, power being provided by overhead wires. For short periods of time, the engines could hold their steam pressure without needing to be connected with the pantographs, but it wasn't trialled on any larger express engines. Many of Europe's steam engines were fitted with electric elements to preheat the boilers ahead of the fires being lit. The advantage is cutting down the slow startup times, waiting for the kettle to boil. But the disadvantage is that boilers don't fare well with sudden temperature changes, and have an increased tendency to crack if heated or cooled too quickly. How would this new experimental engine be different then? At this early stage, there is little information to go off of, but from the scraps that we do have, it's clear that the companies are attempting to overcome many of the issues we've listed. First job is matching the crew comforts of contemporary traction. Freightliner are providing inputs to Eversholt Rail on a Class 60 diesel electric that is being converted as the prototype. Nicknamed tugs, their outline is typical for most modern goods locos, with a cab at either end, power equipment in the middle, and the whole thing mounted on two bogies. So far, in appearance, it's what Bullied imagined all those years ago. So it's a question as to whether Eversholt can solve the issues with transferring the power to each bogie unit. They've opted to abandon the ancient use of cylinders, like on the Leader or the double Fairleys, but to instead try again using 4 steam turbines. This technology has been refined somewhat in the past half a century, because it is still in use across several industries. Perhaps then, these practices could be adapted to rail once more, using lighter machinery, with greater ability to move the loco in either direction. With never-ending cost-cutting to staff across many train operating companies, presumably the aim is for these engines to be operated by one person. So, gone is the fireman, and evidently the fire itself. On the power side of things, there is no single boiler, but instead 20 individual steam generators. There is no coal to be seen, as hydrogen is to be burnt instead. In the 2020s, this is nothing new. There are plenty of experiments ongoing to power trains with hydrogen. A group at the Severn Valley Railway is even converting an old 08 diesel shunter to run on it. But it's less heard of to use it to create a steam engine. The cleaner benefits are clear though. There's no harmful waste like there would be with fossil fuels, and it could be possible to condense and recycle the steam efficiently. 140 kilograms of hydrogen is to be stored in a tank on the loco. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but I suppose hydrogen's light. There isn't any water either, as the hydrogen is to be combusted within a chamber of oxygen to produce high pressure steam. This is something that hasn't been highly successful in UK railway history, so again, I'm watching with interest. Let's look at the pros and cons. If successful, the engine will be far more eco-friendly to the surrounding atmosphere than the diesel engine it used to be, and relatively sustainable if the steam is reused. The higher pressure and 4-turbine combination should equal a great deal of torque and plenty of power. It should also be drivable from either cab with only one crew member. Having multiple steam generators also means that maintenance is simpler, if they can be removed as modules rather than having to replace one boiler. The dangers are still present using high pressure steam, but the risks are greatly reduced by not containing it in one capsule. If the prototype Class 60 proves successful, then economically the option could be there for further conversions, alongside the construction of new units. Imagine having something as old as a Class 37 running for decades to come because it's been converted to steam. The very thing they were built to replace. The downsides are that hydrogen is only a green energy source if it is extracted as such. For small shunting operations, it shouldn't be difficult to have a supply at depots, but on the wider network this is another story. The expense of these generators could also limit how many locos can be converted. Whilst they still will be the same size, it's unclear whether there'll be added weight restrictions with all the new equipment. The problems with steam turbines not operating at consistent speeds will also mean that these engines will really only be suited to long-haul freight trains. Not that that's an issue, since they would be built to replace the diesels currently doing this. Whilst pressure builds on Steamology, the company that are developing the technology, to deliver a locomotive that's equivalent or better in performance than current diesel traction, all we can do is wait and see how it goes. They have experience in heat and power machinery elsewhere, and ultimately the aim is to seek out lower emission alternatives to the diesels that are being phased out one way or another. It is at this stage just one prototype, but development of steam locomotion has returned in a world that has changed significantly since BR claimed that it had come to an end. If this is the start of a new steam age, we can only presume that Eversholt and Steamology have looked to the cancelled experiments of the past to power the way ahead. I for one am looking forward to hearing and seeing a steam turbine out on the tracks, and wish both groups good luck. "2024 truly is a standout year for new build steam. Though mostly it has been through the revival of heritage designs. With the alarming shortage of coal, rise in new signalling requirements, and cut down on available pathings on the mainline, reserved steam engines have a struggle of their own to contend with. There is one engine that was designed to counter all of that, but you'll have to subscribe as that is a futuristic steam video for future. For now, I would love to know your thoughts on this proposed diesel engine converted to steam. Do you think it's a load of hot air? Or could there actually be traction to gain behind this commercial steam scheme? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, as this could be quite a divisive topic. There will be a new guide rail on the first Friday of every month, exploring the world's steam-powered history. My Patreon supporters get early access to everything I post, and get other perks like their name in the credits as well. So follow the link below if you want to support the channel and get weekly behind the scenes posts. Thanks! Many thanks to my brilliant channel patrons: Alex Goodman, GBH Train, D0280 Falcon, Sean Tempest, Random Thomas Fan, Dark White 73, Andrew Dyack, Reese Lee Walter, Ryan RTS, Ewan Pentland, Jude 72, and Steam Power 4472.